Welcome to the Pipeliners Podcast, episode 431, sponsored by Intersys Corporation, providers of POEMS, the Pipeline Operations Excellence Management System, operations and compliance software for the pipeline operator to address safety program management, control room management, and field operations. Find out more about POEMS at intersyscorp.com.
The Pipeliners Podcast, where professionals, Bubba geeks, and industry insiders share their knowledge and experience about technology, projects, and pipeline operations. And now your host, Russel Treat.
Thanks for listening to the Pipeliners Podcast. I appreciate you taking the time, and to show the appreciation, we give away a customized Yeti tumbler to one listener each episode. This week, our winner is Cindy Williams with the Williams Companies. Congratulations, Cindy, your Yeti's on its way. To learn how you can win this signature prize, stick around till the end of the episode. This week, we speak with Shawn Patterson, CEO of Southern Star Central Gas Pipeline and chairman of the SGA Natural Gas Association. And we'll be talking about the future of natural gas. It is so great to do a video podcast for the Pipeliners Podcast, and I'm very lucky to be in Owensboro, Kentucky with Southern Star Central Gas Pipeline and Shawn Patterson. Had a great dinner last night. This is a great location. And Shawn, thank you so very much for agreeing to come on the podcast. I know you're a busy man. We were talking earlier about all the jobs that Shawn has beyond just what he's doing at Southern Star and with SGA and the high school football coach sometimes. And I don't know, how many jobs do you have, Shawn?
Yeah, about 5 or 6. I think I can't keep them straight. But Russell, thanks for having me. I want to welcome you to Owensboro. You know, we have a saying in Owensboro, we're not too big, we're not too small, we're just right. So welcome to Southern Star, sir.
Well, thank you very much. And I will say that that I've known many people who've worked out of this location. I've never been here, and I'm very glad to be here. I've enjoyed the trip. It's a great place.
Actually, Kentucky's a beautiful state.
Thought that I need more time because I can only do so much whiskey a day.
Yeah. Well, hey, before you dive into the questions for me, I've got a little something for you. At Southern Star, we have challenge coins. And I really want to thank you for your military service. You're in the Air Force, correct?
Yes, sir. I sure was.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And it has our company values around the coin, but just wanted to say thank you and appreciate the time today.
That is awesome. You know, I got to think about, I think I need to do these for the podcast. That's great.
I think you do. Yeah, excellent.
Do you collect these?
I do collect these upstairs, and we will have one from the SGA. And once we get that, I'll make sure I send you the SGA coin.
This is number 2 for me, so I'm going to have to start a wall.
Excellent.
Well, listen, let's just kind of dive in. If you would, tell me a little bit about your background, how you got into pipeline and how you found yourself in this particular role.
Oh, wow. You know, I often think about, remember that Grateful Dead album? It came out like the late 70s, I believe, with a long string strip it's been. I think my career is kind of like that. I've had,
You know my background too well, Shawn. This is getting into my head, man.
right. I think, what was that song, Truckin', was it, that line was in?
Yeah.
I think I've had 31 years in the business. And, you know, I like to say I cut my teeth. I grew up in the business. I graduated from a small engineering school in Indiana. My wife was actually a Purdue engineering grad. And we both got jobs in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is kind of up in the northeast corner of Indiana.
Right.
I started off with a little company in the northern third of Indiana called NIPSCO. We had gas and electric, but I was an all gas guy. I was going to go do project engineering on the gas transmission and distribution side. So I spent a few years there, and then NIPSCO grew into that big gorilla called NiSource.
Right.
Had various roles, engineering, ran call centers. Quickly went into operations, was a field guy in Gary, Indiana. We used to call it Beirut by the Lake back in the day because it was murder capital of the world per capita at one point in time. That was in the mid-90s. Actually, my college roommate was from Gary, Indiana. He played defensive end. I played outside linebacker in college. And so my wife got a job. I got a job. We went from kind of the northeast Indiana over to the western part of Indiana. And from there, grew into that gorilla NiSource. So we were in 13 states. We had distribution companies, and back then it was all about consolidation, functional expertise, becoming one engineering term versus several. Migrated way to the top and ended up as the chief operating officer there. I think I was a VP at 29 years old. So, I look back and didn't know what I was doing back then, and have learned a lot that I brought with me.
I think one of the things I've learned in my career, because very different career path for me, but certainly a certain amount of just believing in yourself and boldness, and you could put that in a not as polite a way.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
But that'll serve you well, because people will, there's a need for that in our business. We come against situations where you need leadership, you need boldness, and just you need decisions, you need to move.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. I was bold, probably too bold at times. As you mentioned, a lot of lessons learned.
Simpatico.
Go away from those times.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, was a chief operating officer there for a few years. Our CEO left and became the CEO of the transmission arm. We called it Columbia Pipeline Group. It was a transmission arm in 16 states. He brought me down there as the chief operating officer of Columbia Pipeline Group. I remember one of my highlights to that was we separated away as our individual company, and I got to go to New York and help ring the bell on the stock exchange. That was a cool experience.
That would be very neat.
Yeah, but I kind of segued from distribution to transmission. We had transmission on NiSource, but not the...
So the whole time in gas, kind of all the aspects of distribution, transmission, the utility side, all of it.
Definitely. Did have a piece of electric when I was in the part. Had generating plants and electric distribution transmission as well as part of my career. So,
wow. So what would you say you take away from all that experience? Like you can look back on 30 years and now you're looking forward at, what's the next 10 or so going to look like? What's your perspective on that? Yeah. Where are we as a business and where are we headed?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, growing up in the military, I know we talked earlier before about our military backgrounds, adaptability. I've had 7 homes with my wife. We've lived in 5 states. We've raised a family. So I think, one, you have to be able to adapt to your settings, adapt to the people, adapt to your surroundings. And it helps keep you on your toes as well. Mm-hmm. I often think, if I had a couple takeaways from my career, it's the people. It's like that old story. What do you remember about, playing college football, Shawn? Well, you don't always remember the wins and losses. You remember the people.
Oh, yeah.
And I have met and been around some of the greatest people in the organization. I think back to my first job in Fort Wayne, Indiana, as a field supervisor. I played softball with those guys. I golfed with those guys. But those guys grounded me enough to where I would go out on the field. They'd let me run a backhoe.
Right.
I run the trencher. I did a, directional boring and really learn from the ground up the business. And so I always take wherever I go a profound respect for our frontline workers.
Gosh, I'm over 400 episodes of the podcast now. Right. And one of the things that's certainly thematic is in every area of expertise that we have in our business, that expertise in some way has to be manifested in the guy in the field.
Definitely.
The breadth of responsibility and the breadth of knowledge that's there is it's immense.
Yeah.
I don't see that changing either. I think that's going to become more so.
Yeah, we've had a transition at Southern Star in reference to our workforce. 62% of our folks have had 5 years or less. And so, we're ahead of the industry. A lot of people are going through that transition.
62%, 5 years or less.
Yes. And, we've really invested in technical training. We've really tried to secure from a process perspective that knowledge transfer that you need going forward. But, I always like to say start at the pipe and work your way backwards. Those folks make more decisions day in and day out that impact the business more than I do as the CEO. And, I'll give you a great example, safety. We were not real good in safety 8 years ago when I got to Southern Star. I kind of said we've gone from worst to first. Mm-hmm. One of the best companies out there from a safety perspective. And it's not because of Shawn or the leadership team told the guys and gals in the field to be safe. It's because they own it.
As leaders in this business, our responsibility is to equip those people that are doing the work. We got to figure out what do they need today and what are they going to need tomorrow, and how do we get those things in place for them?
I totally agree. It's about culture, really. I have a saying here, how do we capture the hearts and minds? And, once you have the hearts and minds of your employees, mm-hmm. And you change that culture, you see everything change. Your capital execution is on time and on budget. You spend money wiser. Your your customer relations increase. And you know, I owe that all to folks in the field. They own our culture here. They've moved our culture, and they make us successful. So I think everything in my career, I've done a lot, run call centers internationally, nationally, had operations, had engineering. You know, before I left TC Energy, we were spending about $1.5 billion a year. It truly is about the people. And when your people believe in something and they move a culture, then everything else kind of follows suit.
So very true. Early in my career, you know, I used to think of, I don't know, I'm going to get us a little off in the weeds here, and I apologize for that, but I'm just kind of listening to what you're talking about. It's causing some things to come up. And, you know, I wanted to be an engineer because I wanted to build things.
Yep.
But if you're an engineer and you want to build things, you need people.
Right.
Right? You can't build much of anything of substance without a big team.
Yeah.
So, you know, that has been a journey for me, learning that, right?
Yeah, but it's well put. You know, I tell my son, he's in the Corps of Engineering for the Army now. He's been there 2 years. And, you know, I always see an engineer that can relate to the people and talk to people can do anything.
Oh, yeah.
Good. You know, you see a lot of engineers that redirect and do other things.
That's the best thing the Air Force did for me is they taught me how to talk to people and write.
Yep, exactly.
Which I didn't want to do as a young engineer, but it's probably the most valuable thing I learned, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So where do you think we're going as an industry? I mean, I would say that in our business, you know, there's been a lot of the body politic. You know, what we hear is the general narrative about, well, the future is electricity and the future is batteries and the future is solar and wind and so on and so forth. What's the future for natural gas?
Yeah, I think one, it's strong. I like to tell our team, be bold in reference to natural gas. You know, in 2025, average natural gas consumption for the first time ever in the history of the United States surpassed about 91 BCF per day. All right, so you know, I heard this term, and my team knows I hate this term. It's bridge fuel. Natural gas is not a bridge fuel; it's here to stay.
It's not.
When you look at the forecast and the projections to 2030, natural gas is supposed to grow to another 13 to 16 BCF per day. You know, and so what's causing that, right? You know, I always say it's a three-legged stool. You have electric load growth, which is
Right.
we're seeing a ton of that in our markets, data centers. You have LNG, you know, where it's a race to get to the Gulf with transport pipe for all the right reasons. And then the third stool is kind of the grid operators in the United States, the PJMs, the MISOs, the reserve margins that you have to carry as a generating plant, you know, and generator are growing. And so we're seeing that in our market.
I'm sorry. So what's a reserve margin for the uninitiated?
So how much electric capacity do you have to be called on?
Oh, okay. So
that
that's the difference between my base demand and what my maximum output could be.
Exactly right. And so if you're looking across at the integrated resource plans of generators across the United States, you're going to see a lot of growth. We at Southern Star just landed two big builds, $2 billion builds by one of our customers, and we're the provider of that fuel, that natural gas to fuel that. So I think the outlook is bright. I think that there's enough for wind. There's enough for solar, and there's enough for natural gas well into the future. And it's going to take all of us working together to provide that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. For anybody who wants more information, you should listen to the podcast I did with Scott Tinker, who has he has a show on PBS, but he talks about like the facts and what is the real demand for power and how are we going to feed that demand for energy, and it's compelling. I mean, you know, the bottom line is the future for natural gas is very strong for the long-term future because you're not going to get it all done with these alternatives. Demand's growing too much, and it's going to continue to grow, and it's growing. We're actually at a step function in demand growth due to AI and LNG. It's going to be big.
Yeah, and I say big, you know, I think transformational, and I don't throw that word around lightly. I think in my 31 years, two transformational things happened in our industry. One, the shale boom. As you know, we used to take all the gas out of the Gulf and we shipped it north. And everybody turned their pipelines around and then ran from the south to the north, which, you know, at the beginning of my career, if you'd told me that happened, Russell, I'd have told you there is no way, right?
Right.
Right. And now transformation is just the load growth we're seeing on the natural gas side. It is unbelievable. You know, you're taking short-term contracts now. We're seeing 15, 20. We had a 23-year storage contract.
That hasn't happened in a long time.
It's definitely, the market is coming back around. The demand is there. And as I say, natural gas is back in the game. Not that it ever went away, but it is definitely.
Yeah, I remember, and I think it was 1985, I went to a presentation in Houston that Simmons and Company put on, and they were talking about peak oil, and we're going to run out, we're going to have more demand than we have oil and gas, and what are we going to do? And 3 years later, the shale boom and all of that has changed. So to your point earlier about you got to be ready to adapt and evolve, and things can change quickly. So what do you think our industry needs to respond to that? If we're going to see a big increase in demand, what are we going to need? I mean, I know that it's challenging and has been challenging to hire young people into our business. I think it's fascinating to me that you guys have 61% less than 5 years service. How have you done that?
Yeah, it's definitely been a transition. And, you know, to your point, how do you hire new people or young people into your industry? You know, it's amazing. We've not had problem bringing people on board. So that first imperative is the people imperative. And I'd like to say, where do new people, you know, why do they want to come work for a natural gas company? One, we're a natural gas company that believes in environmental stewardship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have reduced our emissions by 50% in 5 years. We reduced it by an additional 16% back to our 2020 baseline last year. And young folks like to see that. They like to see, hey, we're in the natural gas market. In the middle of the night in the Mid-Con, we're serving that little old lady that needs heat.
Right.
Right. And when she turns on the gas stove, she's going to have, you know, cooking fuel in the morning. But at the same time, we want to do the right thing by the environment. Two, how are we training them? You know, immersive training, virtual 360. The team has really dove into using that new technology to train these folks. And then, you know, I think another thing at Southern Star we use to attract that talent is we really get involved in our communities. I like to say we give back to the communities in which we work, live, and play.
Right.
And so, you know, how do you get your young folks involved to make a difference in where they live, work, and play? And that's giving back to those communities. And so it's allowed us to attract the talent, to retain the talent. And, you know, big things are to come. Now, I know some of these larger companies out there are now going through that transition. And so I think we definitely have to be focused on the people aspect of the business as we go forward. The next one will be technology. You know, what are we doing in the industry to...
Yeah, so we were having this conversation before we got on the camera a little bit. So I want to dig into the geeky bit because I like being technical, and I talk to a lot of engineers. You know, there's a lot going on with tech right now and AI. And I have a premise, and I'm kind of curious what your premise about be. I think AI is probably the most transformational technology we've seen since the internet.
I totally agree.
Yeah,
Totally agree.
I think in terms of where we are in the cycle with AI, is that it's very, very early. We're at the beginning of a bubble, and there's going to be a burst. And at the back end of that, we're going to start really seeing material value come in. And I think that like the opportunity to get the guy in the truck access to the right information right now, that's really compelling.
Yeah, you know, you and I have been around long enough to know we see technology come, we see a transition or the bust, if you will, out, and then where do you extract that value on the back?
Right, exactly.
I talk about that when I talk about technology to the team, and so I think you and I are on the same page. And I think that show the value in the technology to the team, to your point, whether it be the guy in the truck, the guy sitting in the compressor station or in the field.
Or the engineer doing the analysis, or the safety folks, or any of that stuff, that give them the tools they need to do the job that makes their job more valuable.
Exactly. You know, we have, I'd say we dove headfirst into predictive failure monitoring of our engine fleet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's essentially like an airplane. And when an airplane flies and it lands, it troubleshoots itself. here are the things based on these variables that you need to address as a flight crew on the ground.
Right.
We essentially do the same thing with our compressor facilities here. You know, you've heard the smart pipe. I call it smart pipe, kind of on steroids, to where it'll tell you, hey, you don't really need to do an engine overhaul at 3,600 hours of runtime. Here's what you should base that criteria on. You know, I give the example when you change your oil in your car. If you go in a room and ask 20 people, they all give you a different answer.
Right.
Yeah, I change it when it tells me to. You know,
Right.
it may be telling you to do it based on these variables, but take predictive failure monitoring, which I think companies have grasped across our industry, and then put that on steroids and incorporate AI. And, you know, you talk about value. For me, running our compressor fleet and looking at, okay, where I maximize fuel usage. Got 100 compressors. They all don't have to run at the same time, but how am I maximizing that pass-through cost to our customers?
Well, the thing about that is we know that that's a possibility.
Yes.
But we don't have it's not affordable to do that simply with humans. But when you can automate those processes, all of a sudden things you couldn't do simply with humans become affordable.
Millions of iterations done in seconds, right? And so the human intervention is not there. And you show the value not only to your team, but then the customers. Hey, this is a pass-through on your rates, fuel usage. How am I minimizing that for you and that in value? How am I looking at our whole compressor fleet on reducing emissions to the atmosphere? And this is where you start to extract that value long-term, to your point. I think, you know, that's one example of AI. We use it in HR, communications, and we're putting our toe in the water right now.
And that's just one example of technology. There's many, many others. There's things, I think where we are, and is we're kind of on a precipice where that we all kind of have a general understanding of all the different kinds of things we can do with tech. Fleet monitoring, dispatch optimization, engine analysis, all these kinds of things. What we really haven't done is we haven't yet got to a point where we can look at it effectively as a system. And I think that's kind of what's coming next. AI is an enabling technology for that, but it's only an enabling technology. AI is a fancy word for algorithm.
You're exactly right. And I tell the team conjunctively look at it, right? All encompassing, everything in there, to your point. And then you look at downstream. I'm delivering to distribution companies.
Right.
How are we looking at AI across that functional expertise or value chain?
Right.
How am I looking even downstream of me, or upstream, excuse me, on the supply side?
Sure.
You know, and so now you start to say, okay, are you really looking at it holistically and driving and maximizing value, not only for your customers, but for your employees as well? Last thing I just wanted to hit on, you asked me, you know, what do we see in the future? Infrastructure. You know, we are growing at a rate that we've never seen in this organization. And so it requires pipe, compression, people, construction companies, engineering firms. How are you preparing for the future? Look, when it's only going to markets are going to get tighter, the demand for resources will grow and become greater. How are you preparing yourselves to do that as an industry?
And if you're not able to operate efficiently, you will become redundant.
Exactly, you know. But I talk about infrastructure growth, and I've listened to some of your past podcasts, and one of the things you mentioned is upgrading facilities. You know, you kind of went through the integrity days of recoding, and doing the right thing to increase the life of your assets. Now it's about replacement. You know, at Southern Star, there's only 2 companies in the industry that have modernization programs. We're one of them. It's a unanimous agreement with our customers. It allows us to earn a return on and of our asset the very next year. So rather than waiting for a rate case, we start to earn on those facilities the very next year that we put in service, that increase safety, reliability, and service to our customers. I think you're going to see more companies lined up to start replacing assets earlier. And rather than waiting for a rate case, is there some type of modernization mechanism where they can go out and make deals with their customers?
Yeah,
Replace that infrastructure.
You know, Shawn, that's a really interesting point, because what you're saying is not only is there a need for people and technology and infrastructure, there's also a need for business models.
Exactly.
We got to rethink how we're going to approach business given all these other realities.
Yeah, you know, I've heard many people say, "Hey, we're at a infrastructure crossroads." But I say, to your point, take it a step further. You're at an infrastructure crossroads. Now you have to figure out financially, how do you upgrade those facilities? How do you replace that pipe and compression?
Those are 5 to 15 year programs. They're not, 5 to 15-month programs.
Now you're replacing your infrastructure, you're making it more safe and reliable. Then you have your eye on the future for growth as well, and it sets you up for that long-term success we all should be looking at in the industry.
Yeah, this is something that I think I probably need to do more on the podcast about is the nature of our business and how it works, like financially. And one of the things I'll say about the podcast and about just our industry and why I think people listen to it is those of us that call ourselves pipeliners, we don't want to just know our job. We want to know about everybody else's job so that we can do a better job of our job, right? We really want to know about what are all the aspects.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, I want to pivot.
Yep.
I want to talk specifically about your relationship with SGA and the fact you're coming in as a chairman. So first off, why would you take another job?
Yeah. One, I grew up in the industry. I love the industry and love the people in the industry. SGA has been good to me over the years. I've probably been involved with the SGA Natural Gas Association for 25 years. Wow. And so for me, the strength of SGA is that whole best practices, it's collaboration. There are times when even as a CEO where I come across a situation to where, I may need a little help or a little thought, pick up the phone and call, a CEO of Spire and say, hey, Scott Doyle, you ever ran across this?
Right.
What are your thoughts here? And so for me, it's growing up with that relationship that, one, I care for the SGA. I want to see the SGA continue to succeed well into the future. And it truly is about best practice. It's about collaboration. It's about how we make the industry better.
Yeah, it's also a way to pay it forward.
Yep.
Because the industry's been very good to me. I know it's been very good to you.
Sir.
And when we get to this point in our career, it becomes more about giving back.
Yep.
Right.
That's well said.
We again, it goes to why I did the podcast, why I try to get guys like yourself in to come and talk, because we really need the value. We need to capture that experience. We need to get it down on video and in audio, and so that others can benefit from it, because while technology will change and the nature of the business will change, the hard lessons won't change.
Yes, I totally agree with you.
So what's the mission of SGA, and how do you hope to help facilitate that mission in your term as chair?
Yeah, it's a great question. And SGA is all about linking people, information, and ideas. That's the mission of SGA, the Natural Gas Association. For me, the chair comes up with a theme. My theme is natural gas now for all the reasons we talked about earlier. And we wanted a bold theme. We wanted to kind of, hey, we are here. We're ready. We want to grow. And, I think that it captures that. The SGA and SGA Natural Gas Association, those strategic pillars, S is share, G is grow, and A is advance. And I've kind of built my theme to match the pillars. Share. We talked about that. It truly is about collaboration, and it's about distribution companies, transmission companies, suppliers, and our associates. In the SGA, we have over 277 associate members, which are vendors, software companies, construction companies. But it truly is about best practices and how we move the industry forward. And grow. Grow is about training. It's about technical training. It's about leadership development, all the things that we should be as member companies in the SGA striving toward. Again, turnover is in our industry in the next 5 years is tremendous in the industry. What are we doing to better equip our folks, whether it be through the SGA, which has a great training platform that companies can take advantage of, and then what are you doing internally to boost that technical training that's walking out the door and that knowledge transfer, and then advance. Advance it's about efficiency. It's about productivity. It's about truly becoming better in what we do day in and day out.
Yeah. So I want to give you something to chew on.
Okay.
This is something that somebody said to me, and I was taken a little bit aback, and they said, training is for monkeys. Education is for people. Because, and I started to think about that, and I'm involved with the American School of Gas Measurement Technology, have been for many, many, many years, and we talk about doing measurement training.
Yeah.
But it's one thing to go out in the field and know how to do the task of doing a calibration. It's quite a different thing to understand what you're calibrating, why you're calibrating it, and what to look for if the calibration is not going right. And that is thematic across every single task we do in our business.
I love that. And I live by that. I had a boss, Harris Marple. Harris Marple was an old school pipeline. I grew up in the business.
I've known many.
He's the one that kind of helped me and promoted me into that chief operating officer role back in the NISOR days, but he used to say that you train dogs, you educate people. Yeah. And, I've taken that to heart everywhere I go. It truly is about education and
We tend to say training just kind of as a habit of speech, but what we're really meaning is education, because if we're bringing these new people in, we don't just teach them how to do their job. We got to teach them the business.
exactly.
All the ramifications of how they do their job and what happens when it goes right and what happens when it goes wrong, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Well said. Well said.
So I want to leave this. So I have a note here. I just want to look at my note real quick. So the SGA did a town hall to kind of kick off the year. Could you tell us a little bit about the town hall and what was discussed and how the, I know with organizations you kind of, you rally the troops and such. So how did that go and what y'all talk about in the town hall?
Yeah, Suzanne Ogle is the president of SGA. She kind of moderated. She'd ask me questions. We had over probably 220 people attend that call, which is just awesome for that many people to take time out of their busy schedules to attend and hear about the SGA, Natural Gas Association. But we really kicked it off. I introduced the coin, my theme, Natural Gas Now, and talked a little bit about what that meant to the industry, similar to what you and I did. But then we got to open it up for questions, and we had a ton of just great questions from people who attended the town hall. One, I'll just say this: I can't be proud enough to serve the industry.
Yeah.
It's when I look back at my 31 years or what a long, strange trip it's been, I think that if I could pass on and give back to the SGA on what it provided me for all those years, that's what I want to do. And so a lot of the town hall was about, hey, what are your experiences, Shawn? What do we need to be thinking about in the natural gas environment moving forward? And so we talked about a lot of similar things that you and I discussed here today, Russell.
Well, so for the listeners, we will link that up on the podcast. You can go to the pipelinerpodcastnetwork.com and look for this episode, and you'll find some links and resources and some of the other conversation that Shawn's had. Well, look, I want to say thank you very much for taking the time once again, and I want to just end by looking at the camera going, Natural Gas Now.
Natural Gas Now, love it. Thank you for having me, Russell.
All right. Thank you, Ed.
Perfect. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Pipeliners podcast and our conversation with Shawn. Just a reminder before you go, you should register to win our customized Pipeliners Podcast Yeti tumbler. Simply visit pipelinepodcastnetwork.com/win and enter yourself in the drawing. If you have ideas, questions, or topics you'd be interested in, or if you'd like to be a guest, please let me know on the Contact Us page at pipelinepodcastnetwork.com or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next week.